was 11 when we moved into the old Victorian house on Maple Street. I'm 23 now, but I still get chills thinking about what we discovered living beneath us for months. My parents got the place cheap because it had been empty for over a year. The previous owner died of natural causes, and his family wanted nothing to do with it. Looking back, that should have been our first warning. The house had this massive crawl space that ran under the entire first floor. My dad mentioned it once, saying he'd check it eventually, but with work and unpacking, he never got around to it. None of us thought much about it at the time. About 2 months after moving in, I started noticing small things going missing. A bag of chips I'd opened the night before, a juice box from the fridge. Once, an entire leftover pizza vanished. My parents blamed me and my younger sister for being careless or eating things and forgetting, but I knew better. I remembered specifically what I'd left in the fridge. Then the sound started. Late at night, after everyone had gone to bed, I'd hear creaking from downstairs, not the normal, settling sounds of an old house. These were footsteps, slow, deliberate footsteps moving through our kitchen and living room. The first few times, I convinced myself it was my dad getting water or checking the doors. But one night, I heard the sounds while lying in bed, and I could also hear my dad snoring from my parents' room down the hall. Someone else was in our house. I should have told my parents right then. Instead, I grabbed my baseball bat and crept to the top of the stairs. I don't know what I was thinking. Maybe I wanted to be brave. Maybe I wanted to prove I wasn't imagining things. I made it halfway down the stairs when I saw a shadow move across the wall in the kitchen. A human shadow, tall, moving slowly, like whoever it was knew the layout of our house perfectly. I froze completely, unable to move or breathe. The shadow paused. Then it moved toward the hallway where I was standing. I ran back upstairs faster than I've ever moved in my life, dove into my parents' room, and started shaking my dad awake. I was crying and couldn't get the words out properly. He thought I'd had a nightmare at first, but my mom turned on the light and saw how terrified I was. She told my dad to check the house. He went downstairs with my bat while my mom called the police. We heard him checking every room, opening closets, looking behind furniture, nothing. The police arrived and did the same thorough search. They found nothing, no broken windows, no forced doors, no signs of entry whatsoever. My dad started thinking I'd imagined it. The police suggested maybe it was shadows from car headlights passing outside, but I knew what I saw. Someone was in our house, and if they didn't break in, that meant they were already inside. This went on for another week. Food kept disappearing. I kept hearing footsteps. My sister started complaining about the same sounds, but every time we checked, nothing was there. Then one morning, my dad was in the basement doing laundry when he noticed something strange. The small access panel to the crawlspace had been moved slightly. It was supposed to be screwed shut, but the screws were lying on the floor nearby. He opened it to look inside. That's when he found the nest. There's no other word for it. Someone had been living in our crawlspace for months. There was a sleeping bag, empty food containers, water bottles, and a flashlight. Whoever it was had been coming up into our house at night, taking food and returning to their hiding spot before morning. The police came back immediately. They found more than just camping supplies down there. There were photographs, pictures of our family that had been taken through our windows, photos of me sleeping in my room, photos of my sister playing in the yard. The person had been watching us for weeks, maybe even before we moved in. They found a journal, too. Most of it was incomprehensible rambling, but certain parts were clear. The person believed they had a right to live in their house, and that we were intruders. They wrote about watching us, learning our routines, and waiting for the right time to reclaim what was theirs. The most chilling part was the final entry, dated the night before my dad found everything. It said, "The boy saw me tonight. He knows. I'll have to move to a new spot in the house. The attic is better. I can watch all of them from there." They never found who it was. The person had cleared out by the time police thoroughly searched the entire house. They checked the attic, the walls, everywhere. Whoever had been living in our crawl space was gone. We moved out 2 weeks later. My parents didn't even try to sell the house first. We just left. I still think about those photos of me sleeping and wonder how many nights that person stood in my bedroom doorway watching me before I finally noticed them downstairs that one time. When I was 9, my parents hired a new babysitter named Sarah. She was 16, quiet, and seemed responsible. My parents needed someone on short notice for their anniversary dinner, and Sarah's mom attended the same church as us. Everything seemed perfectly normal. Before they left, my mom showed Sarah around the house and gave her the usual instructions. Emergency numbers on the fridge, bedtime at 9 p.m., no boys over, that sort of thing. Then my mom said something that seemed odd at the time but didn't register as concerning until later. She told Sarah, "Don't go into the basement. Ever. If you need anything from down there, call me and we'll get it when we get home. And if you hear anything from the basement, ignore it. Just keep the kids upstairs." I saw Sarah's face change. She asked what my mom meant, but my mom just smiled and said the water heater sometimes makes strange noises and she didn't want Sarah to worry about it. Then my parents left. For the first hour, everything was fine. Sarah made us mac and cheese for dinner and let us watch TV. She seemed normal, if a bit distracted. She kept glancing toward the basement door in the kitchen. It was one of those old doors with a small window at the top, covered by a dusty curtain. Around 8 p.m., we heard a loud thump from downstairs. Sarah jumped so hard she dropped the remote. My little brother Tommy asked what that was, and she said it was probably the water heater like Mom mentioned. But I could tell she didn't believe it, neither did I. That didn't sound like any water heater. A few minutes later, another sound. This time, it was clearly footsteps, slow, heavy footsteps, climbing the basement stairs. They stopped right at the door. Sarah grabbed both of us and pulled us back toward the living room, away from the kitchen. She whispered for us to stay quiet. The doorknob started to turn, slowly, like whoever was on the other side was testing to see if it was locked. Sarah had locked it earlier without us even noticing. The turning stopped. Then we heard something that made my blood run cold. Scratching, long, dragging scratches against the wood of the door, from top to bottom, over and over. Sarah pulled out her phone and called my mom. I could hear her voice shaking as she explained what was happening. There was a long pause. Then Sarah's face went pale. She hung up and told us we were leaving, right now. No getting shoes, no getting coats, just out the front door to her car. As we ran through the living room, I looked back toward the kitchen. The curtain over the basement door window had been pushed aside. There was a face pressed against the glass, a pale face with dark, hollow eyes staring directly at me. The face smiled, not a friendly smile, a wide, wrong smile that showed too many teeth. We made it to Sarah's car, and she locked the doors immediately. She was crying and shaking so hard she could barely start the engine. Tommy asked what was in the basement. Sarah didn't answer. She just drove us to her house and called my parents again. My parents came to pick us up within 20 minutes. They didn't seem surprised. They didn't seem confused. They seemed resigned, like they'd been expecting this call. On the drive home, I asked my dad what was in our basement. He said nothing was in the basement. When I told him what I saw through the window, he said I'd imagined it because Sarah was scared, and it made me scared too. But I knew what I saw. And I knew Sarah saw it too because she refused to ever come back to our house. She wouldn't even accept payment for that night. Her mom told my mom that Sarah had nightmares for weeks about the thing in the basement. We moved out of that house 6 months later. My parents told everyone it was because my dad got a job in another city. But I overheard them talking one night. My mom said, "It's getting worse. It's not staying in the basement anymore." And my dad agreed it was time to leave. Before we moved, I snuck down to the basement one afternoon when my parents were outside packing the moving truck. I had to see what was down there. I had to know. I opened the door and looked down the stairs. The basement was empty, completely empty. No water heater, no furnace, no boxes, nothing. Just bare concrete walls and a dirt floor. But on the wall at the bottom of the stairs, someone had written something in what looked like charcoal. The same message, over and over, covering the entire wall. "I'm still here, I'm still here, I'm still here." I slammed the door and never went near it again. We moved that same week. I've never told my parents what I saw down there. I don't think I need to. I think they already knew. This happened when I was 7 years old. A new kid named Marcus had just moved into the house 3 doors down from ours. He was my age, and his mom came over to introduce themselves and asked if I wanted to come over for a playdate the next day. My mom thought it was sweet and immediately said yes. The next afternoon, my mom walked me down to Marcus's house. It was one of those big, old colonial houses that looked like it had been there forever. Marcus's mom answered the door and seemed friendly enough. She told my mom she'd bring me home before dinner. My mom left and I went inside. The house was weirdly quiet. I don't mean just peaceful. I mean there was something about the silence that felt heavy. Marcus was standing in the living room waiting for me. He smiled but didn't say anything. His mom told us to play nice and disappeared upstairs. Marcus led me to his room on the second floor. It was a normal kid's room with toys, books, and posters on the walls. But something felt off. All the toys looked brand new, like they'd never been played with. There were no scuff marks on the floor, no fingerprints on anything. It looked staged, like a showroom. We started playing with action figures, but Marcus kept stopping mid-play to stare at the closet door. After the third time, I asked him what he was looking at. He turned to me very seriously and said, "We have to be quiet. He doesn't like it when we're too loud." I asked who he was talking about. Marcus pointed at the closet and whispered, "The man who lives in there. He was here before we moved in. Mom says we have to let him stay." I thought he was messing with me. I laughed and said there wasn't a man in his closet. Marcus didn't laugh. He grabbed my arm hard and said, "Don't make jokes about him. He hears everything." That's when I noticed the closet door had a lock on it. Not a regular lock, a heavy-duty deadbolt on the outside, like you'd use to lock someone in. There were scratch marks around the frame, deep gouges in the wood, like someone had tried to claw their way out. I told Marcus I wanted to go home. He said his mom would be mad if I left early. I said I didn't care and started toward the bedroom door. That's when we heard it, a knock from inside the closet. 3 slow, deliberate knocks. Marcus froze. He looked at me with genuine terror in his eyes and put his finger to his lips, telling me to stay silent. Another knock, then another. Then the doorknob started to rattle violently, and the entire closet door shook like someone was throwing their body against it from the inside. I ran. I didn't think. I just ran out of that room, down the stairs, and straight out the front door. I ran all the way home crying. My mom was shocked to see me and asked what happened. I tried to explain about the man in the closet, but she thought Marcus had just been telling me a scary story that frightened me. She called Marcus's mom to apologize for me leaving so suddenly. I watched my mom's face change during that phone call. She went from apologetic to confused to deeply concerned. When she hung up, she didn't say anything for a long time. Then she told me I wouldn't be going back to Marcus's house. When I asked why, she said, "Marcus's mom told me there's no Marcus. She doesn't have any children." I insisted I'd played with Marcus. I described him in detail. My mom called back, and this time she put it on speaker. Marcus's mom sounded confused and upset. She said she lived alone. She'd never come to our house to introduce herself. She didn't know what my mom was talking about. My mom asked about the child who'd been in her house that afternoon. There was a very long pause. Then Marcus's mom said in a shaking voice, "Was it a little boy, about 7 years old? Dark hair?" My mom confirmed. Another long pause. Then, "That's why I bought this house so cheap. The previous owner's son died in the house 10 years ago. His name was Marcus. Sometimes people say they see him. I thought they were just stories." My mom grabbed me and we went straight to Marcus's house. Marcus's mom answered, looking pale and frightened. She said she'd been hearing the knocking too, ever since we called. She'd gone upstairs to check the bedroom and found it exactly how I'd described. Toys laid out on the floor, closet door with scratches, and a deadbolt. She hadn't put any of that there. She called the police to open the closet. I wasn't allowed to watch, but I heard the officers talking afterward. There was someone in there, not a ghost, a real person, a man in his 30s who'd been squatting in the house, hiding in that closet during the day and coming out at night. He'd been there for weeks. But here's what still haunts me. The man they found in the closet wouldn't talk at first. When he finally spoke, he asked the police, "What about the boy? Where's Marcus?" The police said there was no boy, just the man. But the man insisted a child had been bringing him food and water through the door slot every day. A boy named Marcus who said the man could stay as long as he was quiet. They never explained that part. I know what I saw. I played with Marcus. Marcus's mom confirmed she'd never seen a child in her house. The squatter claimed he'd been talking to Marcus for weeks. So, who did I play with that day, and who had been taking care of the man in the closet? I was 13 when this happened, old enough that my parents felt comfortable leaving me home alone for a few hours. They'd gone to a wedding 2 towns over and wouldn't be back until late. They made me promise to keep the doors locked and not answer for anyone except them. Around 7 p.m., I was in the living room watching TV when I heard our doorbell ring. I ignored it like my parents told me to. The doorbell rang again, then someone started knocking, loud, insistent knocking that didn't stop. I crept to the window and peeked through the curtain. It was Mrs. Chen from next door. She'd lived beside us for years. She baked cookies for us every Christmas. My mom helped her carry groceries sometimes. She was harmless, so I figured it was okay to at least see what she wanted. I opened the door, but kept the chain lock on. Mrs. Chen looked upset, almost frantic. She said her phone wasn't working and she needed to call her daughter urgently. It was a family emergency. She asked if she could come in and use our phone. Everything in me said to say no, but she looked genuinely distressed. I told her to wait there. I'd bring the cordless phone to her. She smiled and said that would be perfect. I went to get the phone from the kitchen, and when I came back to the door, Mrs. Chen was gone. I looked outside. She wasn't on our porch. She wasn't walking back to her house. She'd just vanished. I stood there confused, holding the phone, wondering if I'd imagined the whole thing. Then I heard footsteps behind me, inside my house. I spun around, and Mrs. Chen was standing in my hallway. She'd somehow gotten inside while I went to get the phone, but the front door was still chained. I could see it from where I was standing. She smiled at me, but it wasn't her usual warm smile. This smile was cold. Wrong. She said, "Thank you for letting me in, sweetie." I told her I didn't let her in. I asked how she got inside. She tilted her head like she didn't understand the question and said, "You opened the door. That's all the invitation I needed." I backed away slowly. She didn't move. She just watched me with that strange smile. I asked what she wanted. She said she'd been waiting for years for my parents to leave me alone. She said the house had something she needed and it was finally time to take it back. I asked what she was talking about. She started walking toward me, slowly, still smiling. She said when my parents bought this house, they got something that belonged to her family, something they'd hidden decades ago, something valuable, and she wanted it back. I had no idea what she meant. I told her I'd call the police. She laughed and said, "Go ahead, call them. Tell them your sweet old neighbor asked to use your phone. See what they do." She was right. I'd opened the door for her. I'd gotten the phone for her. She hadn't forced her way in. Who would believe she was threatening me? I ran upstairs to my room and locked the door. I could hear her downstairs, opening drawers, moving furniture, searching through closets. She was tearing apart our house, looking for something. I called my parents, crying, telling them Mrs. Chen was in the house and acting crazy. They didn't believe me at first. They said Mrs. Chen was harmless. I begged them to come home. My dad finally agreed, saying they'd leave the wedding early, but they were an hour away. I was stuck in my room listening to Mrs. Chen destroy our house. After about 30 minutes, the sound stopped. Complete silence. I waited, afraid to come out. Then I heard her voice right outside my bedroom door. She said, "I found it, dear. I'm leaving now. Thank you for your cooperation." I heard her footsteps go down the stairs. The front door opened and closed. I waited another 10 minutes before I dared to leave my room. When I finally came downstairs, the house was a disaster. Every drawer emptied, every closet ransacked. Cushions thrown off furniture, but nothing was missing. TV still there, my mom's jewelry box untouched, my dad's laptop still on his desk. Whatever she'd been looking for, she'd either found it or given up. My parents arrived and were horrified by the mess. My dad immediately went next door to confront Mrs. Chen. He came back 5 minutes later, looking pale. He said the house was dark, no one answered. He looked in the windows and the house appeared empty. Not just empty like no one was home. Empty like no one lived there. No furniture, no curtains, nothing. We called the police. They did some checking and found out the house next door had been vacant for 8 months. The previous owner, an elderly woman named Mrs. Chen, had died in a nursing home the year before. The house had been in probate and was scheduled to be sold next month. We'd been living next to an empty house for months, but I saw Mrs. Chen multiple times during those months. She waved to us. She talked to my mom over the fence. My mom had helped her with groceries just 3 weeks earlier, but according to records, she'd been dead for over a year. The police asked if anything was taken. My parents checked everything carefully. Nothing was missing except one thing. In our basement, there was a loose brick in the wall that my dad had always meant to fix. Behind that brick, there'd been a small space. My dad used it to hide some emergency cash. When he checked, the money was gone. But so was something else. Something my parents had forgotten was even there. When my grandpa died, my dad had inherited an old lockbox. He'd hidden it behind that brick and never opened it because he didn't have the key. The lockbox was gone. Whatever was in it, that's what Mrs. Chen had come for. Or whatever had been pretending to be Mrs. Chen. We never found out what was in that box, and we never saw Mrs. Chen again, even though I sometimes feel like she's still watching our house, waiting to see if we find anything else that belonged to her. The creepiest part, my mom went through old photos after that night. She found a picture from a neighborhood barbecue 2 months earlier. In the background, you can see Mrs. Chen's house. The windows are dark, the yard is overgrown, and on our porch, standing with my mom and smiling at the camera, is Mrs. Chen. But according to the records, she'd already been dead for 10 months when that photo was taken. I was 8 years old and had just started staying home alone for short periods. My mom ran a daycare from our house during the day, but by 6 p.m. everyone was gone, and she'd usually run quick errands before my dad got home from work around 7. She'd be gone for 30 minutes max, and I was told to lock the door and not touch anything. This particular evening, my mom left to grab groceries. She'd be back in 20 minutes, she promised. I locked the door behind her like I was supposed to and went to the living room to watch cartoons. Our house was part of a suburban development where all the houses looked similar. Same builders, same layouts, just different colors and slight variations. I was watching TV when I heard a key in the front door. The lock turned and the door opened. I figured my mom had forgotten something, but it wasn't my mom. It was a man I'd never seen before. He was carrying grocery bags and talking on his cell phone, laughing about something. He walked right past the living room into the kitchen without even looking at me. I sat frozen on the couch. The man was in my kitchen, putting away groceries in my fridge, still talking on his phone. He sounded normal, happy, like he belonged there, but he was a complete stranger. I didn't know what to do. I was too scared to move or make a sound. He finished putting the groceries away and walked toward the living room. That's when he finally saw me. He stopped mid-sentence on his phone call. We stared at each other for several long seconds. Then he looked around the living room, really looked at it, like he was seeing it for the first time. His face went pale. He said into his phone, "I'll call you back," and hung up. Then he looked at me and said very quietly, "Who are you?" I was too terrified to answer. He looked around again, more frantically this time. He checked the photos on our walls. He looked at our furniture. Then he said, almost to himself, "Oh my God, this isn't my house." He pulled keys from his pocket and stared at them like they'd betrayed him. Then he looked at me, and I could see he was just as scared as I was. He said, "I'm so sorry. I thought this was my house. The key worked. I just moved here. The houses all look the same. I'm so sorry." He backed toward the door, holding up his hands like he wanted to show me he wasn't a threat. He kept apologizing over and over. He said he lived 3 houses down and must have walked to the wrong house, out of habit from where he used to live. He said the key shouldn't have worked, but it did, and he wasn't paying attention. Then he left, just walked out and closed the door behind him. I ran to the window and watched him walk down the street to another house that did look almost identical to ours. He went inside and I could see him through the window, pacing around, running his hands through his hair like he was freaking out. My mom came home 5 minutes later. I told her everything. She was horrified. We went down to the man's house together. A woman answered, his wife. My mom explained what happened. The wife was shocked and called the man to the door. He apologized profusely again. He showed us his key, and we went back to our house to test it. His key worked perfectly in our lock. It shouldn't have. Different houses, different locks, but his key opened our door like it was made for it. My dad came home and was furious. He wanted to call the police. The neighbor begged him not to, saying it was an honest mistake, a bizarre coincidence with the keys. My dad agreed not to call the police, but insisted on changing our locks immediately. The neighbor paid for it, still apologizing. He and his wife brought over cookies the next day to apologize again. They seemed like genuinely nice people who'd made an honest, if terrifying, mistake. Everything seemed resolved. We laughed about it eventually, calling it the wrong house incident. But then, about 2 weeks later, I was home alone again. Same situation. Mom running errands, would be back in 20 minutes. I was doing homework at the kitchen table when I heard a key in the lock again. I froze. The lock turned. The door opened. It was the same man. This time he wasn't on the phone. This time he wasn't carrying groceries. He walked in silently and closed the door behind him. He looked directly at me. No surprise on his face this time, no confusion. He'd known exactly which house he was entering. He didn't say anything. He just stood there, staring at me. I asked what he was doing here. He said very calmly, "I needed to come back. I left something here last time." I told him he didn't leave anything. We'd checked. He smiled slightly and said, "Not something you would have found." I asked what he was talking about. He walked past me, down our hallway, straight to my bedroom. I followed him, my heart pounding. He went directly to my closet, moved some boxes aside, and pulled up a loose floorboard I didn't even know was loose. Underneath was a small space. He reached in and pulled out a plastic bag. Inside the bag was money, a lot of money, bundles of cash wrapped in rubber bands. He looked at me and said, "The family who lived here before you. I used to date their daughter. She helped me hide this before I went to prison. I got out last month. I've been watching your house, waiting for the right time to get it back." He started walking toward the door with the bag. I asked if he'd been in our house before. He stopped and looked back at me. He said, "Only once, while you were asleep. I needed to make sure it was still here." The key thing was lucky timing, made it easier to come back today. I asked when he'd been here while I was asleep. He said, "Does it matter? I got what I came for. I won't be back." Then he left, just walked out with the money. I immediately called my mom and told her everything. She raced home and we called the police. They searched the floorboards and found the space he'd described. It was empty now, except for some old newspapers from 3 years ago. The police went to the man's house. The house was empty, not temporarily empty, completely cleared out. No furniture, no belongings, nothing. The landlord was called. He said the house had been vacant for 2 months. The previous tenants moved out, and no one new had moved in yet. But I'd watched the man go into that house 2 weeks earlier. I'd seen lights on. I'd seen movement inside. The police showed me a photo of the previous tenant. Different person, not the man who'd been in our house. They checked with the family who lived in our house before us. They confirmed they had a daughter, but she'd never dated anyone that matched my description. And she said she didn't know anything about money hidden in the house. My dad changed the locks again. We put in an alarm system. But here's what still bothers me. The police dusted for fingerprints in my room and on the floorboard. They found prints, but they didn't match anyone in the system. What they did find was strange. The prints were old, based on the dust patterns and degradation. The forensics team estimated the prints were at least 5 years old. But I watched that man touch that floorboard 2 weeks ago. I saw him pull up the board with his bare hands. So how were his fingerprints 5 years old? We also had the police check our security camera footage. My dad had installed a basic camera pointed at the front door after the first incident. We reviewed the footage from the day the man came back. On the footage, you can see our front door. You can see it opening, but no one walks through it. The door just opens on its own, stays open for about 5 minutes, then closes. During those 5 minutes, I was inside talking to someone who wasn't there. The police had no explanation. The forensics team had no explanation. My parents wanted to move, but my dad had just gotten a promotion and we couldn't afford to. We lived in that house for 3 more years. Nothing else happened, but I never felt safe there again. Sometimes late at night, I'd hear footsteps in the hallway. My parents said it was the house settling, but I knew better. Someone was still walking through our house. Someone who had a key that worked even after we changed the locks. Someone who could come and go without appearing on cameras. Someone who'd been there long before we moved in and would probably be there long after we left. On the day we finally moved out, I took one last look at my old room. The floorboard had been nailed down permanently by my dad, but I noticed something I'd never seen before. Scratched into the wood of the closet door, barely visible, were words, "Thank you for keeping it safe." I don't know who wrote that. I don't know when it was written, and I really don't want to know who I was keeping that money safe for all those years.